All right, we're back for another session. Like, I know a lot of people were skeptical out there, when we dropped this a few weeks ago. The way podcasts go these days, are they going to be able to put up a second episode? Boom, we got the second episode coming right here. It's me, Pat Smith. We got the folks that we've had with us, Michael Schnerla, Sarah Fisher, people that have also been curious about what's going on with this merger review commission, which came out of a House Bill 314 last year, where we've got folks thinking and talking about making some big, heavy changes, potentially to the way that Louisville Metro merged city-county government works. Recently, what sort of got us on this recently was there was a series of public meetings going down. And we were sort of like, oh gosh, like what is going on with all this? This seems like there could be some really fundamental proposals coming out of folks from state government, largely about how this could affect lots of different kinds of services, the way the city is managed, counties managed. We have a lot of questions. We have a lot of questions about the way that they're doing the supposedly thorough and searching review, which was mandated by House Bill 314. This is all in the past episode, and we'll get that up. That'll be linked to wherever you found this. But luckily today, we have a fantastic local leader with us, someone that is actually on the board that's been put together to look at this, someone that's on this commission to do this searching and thorough review of whether or not merger is supposedly working or not, and who's it working for, and maybe who it isn't working as well for. But we have Councilperson Jecorey Arthur with us as a member of the commission coming on to talk. He volunteered. He found out we were doing this and got in touch. And we're thrilled to have you, Jecorey. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, but more importantly, thank you all for covering this and letting folks get informed about what's going on so they can get involved.
You're so welcome. I mean, really, folks like Michael and Sarah, gosh, was it like a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago? We were just trying to get some basic questions answered, because this has kind of flown under the radar of a lot of local media, and not because they're not interested. I think just because we live in this world where increasingly there's less money and less resources for coverage of this kind of local political thing. And you've got a lot of, I think, journalists stretched thin. You got a lot of newsroom editors that, there's so much going on, they're not sure where to put folks. But really, I think thanks to folks like Michael and Sarah, local media has been a little bit more on this recently. Like, for instance, gosh, was it 6 weeks ago? We didn't even know the names of the people that were on the commission. They weren't on the city website. They weren't in any kind of news story. And just thanks to us sort of, I think, like, clamoring for it, like we started to get more and more information out. And a piece of this, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later, is in terms of getting this information out, is like this supposedly thorough and searching review. I think there's clearly some transparency issues around the data. We're I think, curious in why some of the data has been presented as it has. But just first of all, I just wanted to take a step back from these data issues and just get your whole sense of how this whole thing's happening, the level of seriousness that you see in this, the level of sort of others in local government, and around the city, sort of understanding what this is even about.
So I'll start with House Bill 314 itself, because it didn't just create this commission, it also limited the mayoral terms from 3 terms to 2 terms. It also made it easier for people to come together and create their own suburban cities without Metro Council approval. So when I say this commission is serious and will change Louisville Metro in some way, shape, or form, I cannot overstate that. I just heard yesterday, and these are rumors about recommendations, that somebody on the commission is interested in having less Metro Council districts.
Mm.
And what you hear throughout the commission since we've been meeting is that 2/3 of the population is in the old county. So if you have less Metro Council districts, you got to think about what that means for where the political power will eventually go. There's a lot of conversation around emergency services and ambulances that come into the inner city. We talked about that quite a bit in the last commission. These are life or death issues, because when you think about how people desperately need those emergency services, and if you call and no one in the inner city in the urban services district can come and respond to that call, and you don't have access to an emergency vehicle that's outside of the inside of the Watterson, you could die. So when I talk about how serious the work of the commission is, I don't just mean that rhetorically. I don't mean that in any ambiguous way. I mean that this commission will impact Louisville in some way. And in some cases, it could be life or death.
And could I jump in there and just talk about another part of the bill that I think is really serious, where, based on this recommendation that comes out from the review commission, the bill actually gives the state the ability to make internal or statutory recommended changes to things like the roles and duties of the mayor, taxing powers, funding, distribution of government services, and the relationship between the Louisville Metro government and the suburban cities. So that gives the state this sort of power based on the report to do or recommend a lot of changes to all of those things.
Yeah, it's massive. There are so many angles, so many sort of areas. I think it's so big, it's hard to talk about. And with a group, and this was really apparent to me. There was an actual commission meeting last Friday. I know, Michael, you were there in person. I think Sarah and I were tuning in. Jecorey, I think you were actually there in person also as a commission member, and just watching this group, which some of these folks, in my opinion, I'm not sure they're coming in good faith, that they really want to sort things out. I think they have a predetermined agenda, and they're setting things up to try to reflect, things that they've already decided in their minds, and don't really care what an analysis is. That's my opinion. But just seeing how difficult it was to even try to have this conversation around one of these facets, which was the emergency services thing. You couldn't really even have a conversation without this thing just going off the rails in like multiple different directions, as different folks just had a lack of understanding around what was even talked about. And one notable thing around that for me was the actual people contracted to do this analysis didn't seem to have a clear understanding of what was going on with emergency services. Had charts labeled in ways that didn't really make sense or reflect what really is happening. I'm not sure we're taking into account things like our massive hospital systems are in the USD. Like, I don't know. It just seemed like a part of the conversation to me around this, like, seems to be that the analysis itself isn't maybe as thorough and searching as HB 314 has asked for it to be.
You're right. And I feel out of place sometimes because I've been in metro government for 2.5 years. When the city and the county merged, I was in like the third or the fourth grade. So most of the commission, I'm playing catch up, trying to learn about our city over the past 2 decades and learning as I go. And at the same time, questioning what I know will end up hurting not only the constituents in District 4, but really constituents across the inner city and beyond. And it's kind of weird to say that out loud and consider that here I am as the youngest person on the commission with probably the least knowledge and experience, but also at the same time being the most vocal, when really the person fighting back and pushing back should be the person who's in charge of these services. And that's our mayor, Craig Greenberg. When we get data dumps from the University of Louisville researchers who are part of this project, there are a lot of comments made about the data. There's a lot of anecdotes about the data, and the people who actually provide those services, and not just provide them in the now, but people who have provided and been responsible for those services for years, way before I got here. They should be in those commission meetings correcting the record. They should be in those commission meetings clapping back whenever we have somebody who represents parts of the county who don't even receive some of those services making assumptions about what the data means. And that is not only a missed opportunity,
Yeah.
it's political negligence.
Yeah.
And because of that, what's going to happen is you're going to have a report that gets made where the record is incorrect and inaccurate,
Yeah.
and it's going to harm Louisville. As I said, I cannot overstate that enough. So I'm really disgusted and really surprised by the fact that there is a lack of engagement from the executive branch that provides these services, because that's mostly what we've been talking about. We haven't talked a whole lot about the relationship of the council members and the legislative bodies and whatnot. We've talked a whole lot about direct government services from the executive branch, but oddly enough, our executive branch is all but missing.
Corey, can I ask a logistical question? So whenever I've seen the commission have an agenda or present speakers or even manage the public meetings, a lot of times the chairs in particular are very strict about who can speak and how long and who is, what sort of questions or statements you can ask. Is it up to the commission to invite people to come to the meetings to speak, or could anyone somehow contact the commission? Like, could Greenberg contact the commission and say, hey, I want to be on the next agenda? Or how's that sort of gatekeeping happening?
So as I said, I'm kind of figuring things out as I go on the commission. The commission itself is figuring things out as it goes. This is what people consider an unfunded mandate. So when the state said you have to have this commission, for the first few months, we were really just trying to figure out, okay, who's doing what? Is Metro TV going to stream this? Are we going to have a website that lists the information and the data and the members? Who's going to be responsible for the agendas? I remember at one point, we didn't even have agendas until we showed up to the meeting. It's really been done kind of haphazardly and all over the place since the commission actually started.
Yeah.
We don't have any sort of bylaws or rules that we go off of. We really just have the legislation. And to a certain extent, the legislation is almost meaningless because it specifically says we should study the successes and insufficiencies of Louisville Metro government. And we spent a lot of time on the insufficiencies. We haven't really talked about the successes of Metro government.
Yeah, that's the thing that clearly stands out the most to me is I just haven't seen anything approaching searching and thorough, which is the language from 314. And it seems like based on some of the stuff you were saying, like there wasn't really a plan for this. This is something the state government asked for. And what I'm seeing is like Metro Council kind of figuring out and jumping in with like their own staff and people around the building to like make this thing work, which is crazy to me. It's like you guys didn't even, this isn't even your idea, but like I've seen counselors are like getting their own staff to do things, or various Metro offices to jump in with their own time, which has been paid for by us to do different job responsibilities. But we need to take existing staff away from their job responsibilities to put them on this thing that folks like Jason Nemes have asked for, because it was unfunded. But it also leads to these other huge structural problems. Like Michael was in touch with Councilperson Piagentini from the Far East District, and he seems to think that there's like it's not even clear on disagreement on who runs the data process, even like who's even in control of this. Is it even centralized? Who's talking with the various researchers, whether from U of L or UK? It just seems like kind of a mess. I mean, it again leads me to believe that the people that ask for this have a predetermined outcome in their mind, and they're not really interested in these conversations, and they're not really interested in a proper analysis.
Yeah, and I'll say I was very optimistic. I think it was the first meeting I talked about this. Can it harm Louisville? Absolutely, but it could also help Louisville. And I was very clear at the very beginning about what could we get out of this that benefits our city. And I just don't know where other people are with that as we've worked through this process. It's been a lot of just figuring it out, and it's been very concerning for me. I still have a little bit of optimism, but after the last meeting, it's almost fading to nothing.
Sarah, I think you've jumped in with audio. Thanks so much for coming in. Did you have anything? I know you watched a little bit of the meeting last week. What were your thoughts?
It was honestly, I mean, as Jecorey said, as expected, but also increasing disappointment, because seems very much business as usual. Everyone came in with a set, well, not everyone, a large majority came in with a set narrative, which they've continued to skew the data to fit that narrative. And really, this was an opportunity to figure out what is and isn't working in merger, because everyone, I think, agrees it isn't working for one reason or another. And there really hasn't been a good effort into figuring out what isn't working, and because of that, I have a lot of reservations. I don't believe anything's going to get better.
I do. I'll point out too.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry for you for this, Sarah.
No. I'm just kind of condense my thoughts, and I don't like being horribly pessimistic, but I'm feeling very pessimistic at the moment.
I think something else that was evident with each of the public meetings that Sarah and I were at a few of them was the people on the commission, maybe the chairs and some other people as well, were very clear sometimes in their statements to say things like, we are trying to show here that the suburbs are subsidizing the urban service district, or that it is our goal to show this. Like, they actually use those words in the public meetings, and they're sitting on the commission. And so I don't think there's much doubt that there's a preconceived notion just using their own verbiage. And then, to your previous comment, Jecorey, about you being new to all this, I think a lot of the commission members are new to this. This is a very complicated issue. There's a lot of things, and your commission, in my opinion, has touched on maybe a quarter of everything that they should be touching on. But when you start to then pay a professor to analyze, or professors to analyze some sort of data that they're responsible for gathering, and then that data is presented, I think another point of confusion with some council people on the commission is that some of them think that the data behind those analyses are being published. Like in many of the public meetings, they would say, yes, that raw data is on the website, or it will be, or it's my understanding it has been published. But if you go to the website, it's just PDFs. And I think any reasonable person would say that is not raw data, that's charts and graphs and maps. And so a lot of the analyses will do some sort of, some sort of analysis that requires a lot of thought, calculations, multiple data sources, like trying to determine who lives where by census data and how that connects to occupational license tax. That's a tricky calculation, but that's like one of the main charts that's shown. And we, as people looking at that chart, have no idea how that chart is made. And even though people think that data behind that is published, it's not. And I feel like that's a big point of confusion among the commission members themselves, but also the researchers. I think the researchers would like to see that published.
100%. And just like, Jecorey, you said you're like new to this, or that you're the youngest person involved. You're asking the best questions that I've heard as I've watched these things about what's going on with this data. And you've made points that I've seen in at least a couple of meetings that are actually correcting wrong information that are on these analyst slides, like, or mislabeled things. And it's, this is like, this to me is a major point here, is that this is like some of the things Michael was talking about, which I'd like to ask Michael a little bit about it, some analysis and some videos, some short videos he made about this, is that like, it doesn't seem like the folks that have been hired to do this analysis are interested in doing a proper and thorough analysis, and they're kind of responding to the committee or commission members kind of just like as they get different emails, and as a various office gives them a big Excel file or CSV, and they try to do something with it, and they may not even be sure what they're looking at. I mean, I was a consultant in this kind of data stuff for over a decade, and like, I know what these files look like when you get them from somebody, and it may not be what you think it is. And you may need to take this data back to an office and ask questions about it. And you definitely shouldn't make assumptions about what you're getting. And it just seems like a real analysis around this would have taken a lot of time. Put all that aside, and you see the kind of charts that Michael's referencing, that they paint this picture like that it seems like has been predetermined, which I don't believe, that the outside of the urban service district area is getting some kind of a raw deal. I'm not sure that's accurate. And just given the low density nature of that area, I think they're getting quite a lot for the much lower tax rate that they pay. But then just some basic things to normalize this data. When I say normalize, that means makes it comparable. Michael, you've done some really good work on looking at why this data and how this data could be normalized, that these folks with like full-on PhDs and decades of experience aren't doing? This is something that's baffling me.
Yeah, I think just to touch on some of my main points that I've been trying to make around these analyses is, if you look at, I'd say 95, 99% of all the data that's been published in the report and that are connected to some geographic area, like outside urban service, suburban city, a zip code, anything like that, any state, it's always just the sum of whatever that is, the sum of the tax revenue in that area, the sum of maybe the cost of the services, or the straight percent of tax that's being that people are paying in that area. But the two things that are not in almost any calculation are normalizing that to make it per capita, per person, per voter. That's really important. You've got to look at the residents of your city and take that into account. If you if you want to serve an area that has 10 residents per acre, that's going to cost a much different amount of money than another area, let's say in the urban service district, that's 200 people per acre. And if you got to look at that per capita analysis, and they're not slicing those numbers that way at all. The other thing is land use, land area. There's no discussion of like, what does this cost per acre, per square mile, per council district even, to provide these services, or what is the tax collected? So, maybe the example is one chart shows that from their analysis, which I think is actually flawed anyway, but it says that over 35% of the unincorporated area of the county is where 35% of tax revenue is coming from unincorporated areas, and only, let's say, 17% is coming from suburban cities and 20% from urban service districts. So it sounds like from that, just the sum total of occupational license tax paid by place of residence, that the unincorporated area is probably double the amount of revenue, tax revenue collected at urban service district. But if you just look at the population, the count of people in those areas, well, the population of the unincorporated area is the same percentage different as the percentage of tax revenue. So, for instance, it's almost double the population, because it's such a larger land area. You're talking Jefferson County's 400 square miles. A lot of that is unincorporated area, most of it.
Like 275 square miles of that.
Yeah, you know the numbers. And so when you look at it, all you're doing by summing these things is just looking at, it's equivalent to your population count in that area. So then if you divide those same numbers per capita, per person, it's about the same. The urban service districts, the suburban cities, unincorporated areas, it's all about the same. Tax revenue per person, kind of between 240.
Occupational tax, right?
Occupational tax per person, 240 to 300. Very similar. And then if you take that extra step and look at it per square mile, let's say, now urban service district is 2 to 3 times what the unincorporated area of the county is. And so you're basically, whenever you do this, when you ever look at per person or per square mile, those numbers that seem to show one thing in favor of an unincorporated area or suburban city, they flip, or they're significantly worse when you try to look at it per land area or per voter.
That's a great point. And like, occupational tax is a big one, but there's a bunch of other different kinds of taxes. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of services, and there's a bunch of different ways that the small cities, the unincorporated area, and the USD all interface with these. And that all needs to be matrixed out, and that needs to be looked at in every iteration of those things. What does the occupational tax mean for these areas? What does the insurance premium tax mean for these areas? What is the best we can say about EMS in all 3 of these areas? What is the best we can say about police? Every single libraries, parks, public works, like that needs to be systematized and demonstrated in an objective way across all of this stuff. It's just a complicated analysis, and the people that they've given tens of thousands of dollars to do this analysis really don't seem to be spending a whole lot of time on it. And this is not a searching and thorough review. Like you can't call it that. This needs more time. Like this, like if I was a commission member, I would be like, September 15th or whatever the deadline for the report is, recommend the recommendations. I would just we need a lot more time, and we need some different chefs in the kitchen to cook on this data a little bit longer, and hopefully some kind of objective chefs, because I mean, I'm not saying that the existing researchers or analysts have an axe to grind. I'm just not sure why they're coming up with what they're coming up with, because it just seems like really incomplete stuff to me.
Patrick,
Yeah, and I realized that.
think,
I was just gonna say that they had a chart
Sorry.
at one of the meetings that showed 2/3 of capital projects from fiscal year 12 to fiscal year 22 happened in 2 zip codes, basically downtown and then 40203 around downtown. And the source said Metro Council staff. And when I asked who is the source, who actually on the Metro Council staff gave that to you, because we do have staff people that serve the entire Metro Council, they named the director of the Republican caucus. How is that data reflective of the entire Metro Council? And how are you excluding federal projects that paved roads and sidewalks on the outskirts of town? You know, I used to think that they were kind of set up for failure, but now I'm starting to question whether or not they're actually doing an objective job at making sure we're studying what's insufficient versus what's a success.
Sarah, what were you going
to
to say?
Underscore that, I just honestly, Jecorey set me up perfectly, because I really think that's the root of the problem. It's not objective. The researchers are not spending the right amount of time doing this analysis, but they're also doing what's asked of them. And the people, the majority of people are asking for a specific type of data, specific type of interpretation of that data. And that's what's being presented. As they're not looking at all the wider issues. Like as Michael said, they've kind of completely ignored the per capita aspect of this analysis. They mention it a couple times, and apparently that's sufficient, which it really isn't. It's one of the key ways we actually look at city, county demographics and report on those. So they're giving the commission what they're asking for, which is not what an academic and impartial analysis should do. It should look at all the facts and give an objective opinion or an objective result. And they're not. And I really would be curious if there's any type of reporting requirement of how much time they're spending on this analysis, because they're getting a considerable amount of money to do this as consultants. And it really seems like it has been an afterthought. Like the last meeting, they said they just got more data and they're interpreting it. And they were supposed to have this analysis done, or at least about to be finished, and they're still getting data and they still are not able to answer pretty general questions. So I'd like to see actually how much time they've spent on this, if there's any reporting requirements from that end.
And to all your points about this, there's this one slide that you're referencing, Jecorey, capital projects and expenditures, and they're highlighting 2 zip codes downtown. I mean, there's so many caveats on this slide. That one, it's the Metro Council staff database, like you mentioned. So we'd like to see, what is that? How are you summing this up? What is that data? And then things like it excludes paving, it excludes federally funded projects. It primarily covers parks, libraries, sidewalk renovations, but it doesn't say which parts of those items. It's just so, without seeing the data behind it, how they sum that up by zip code and the source, there's no way to have any faith that this is a valid and complete analysis that we can rely on, or even the state should rely on. And there's this objective part of it, which is you all were talking about too, and maybe Pat, you could talk to this, but for I think the amount of money that's been spent on the researchers, and Jecorey, do you have an idea of how much has actually been spent that you had to scrounge together to pay UK U of L researchers?
What's been spent so far, I'm not sure, but I think the contract was $100,000.
Yeah, that was my impression, is that you have about 100,000 to work with. So for that amount of money, you could hire a professional company that does nothing but this analysis. There's companies that just do tax versus services analysis for a whole city. There's multiple companies. And for that amount of money, you could have an objective organization who knows how to do this and do it well and get really good results. And what's frustrating to me is when this was created, I really thought, well, this is a chance for something like that to come out of this commission, regardless of what the results are. But it would be so useful for Park, for the city, for everyone in the county, for the state to see that breakdown of tax revenue of different types, service costs. Where can we optimize things? Where are the deficiencies and where are the successes? I would love to have seen a really good analysis come out of this commission. And maybe that's like, maybe it's too hopeful because of the way the bill is written, to be able to hit the brakes and say, hey, we should instead get some funding to do it this objective and complete way. But I wish that could happen, or it would have happened.
My read on what's going on with the U of L folks is that they're not taking it seriously, and they're not putting in the time for the money on what this would take. It seems like they're getting some files from people in departments had they even looked at this data? Have they cleaned this data? Do they have a context for what these files are that they've gotten? First, primary basic questions you ask. I'm not sure that I think these folks that they've contracted with have many other jobs that they're working on. Some of them are teaching courses. They have other contracts they're working on. Some of them I think are putting graduate students or like their assistants on some of this work. I think they're taking available data and they're trying to put together a presentation with it to justify, the contract. And I don't think they're doing the due diligence and getting down and getting the correct data or being honest to say that we didn't get the right data. And we're not sure that we should cash this check because we don't have the full and proper amount of data. We're not going through. We haven't even listed out what every tax is in the city. We don't even have a slide that says what every tax is. Are you kidding me? You kidding me? I mean, and that's not even doing an analysis in those taxes. Just show me one slide that shows what all the revenue sources are, and show me one slide that shows what all the outputs are. You know what I'm saying? This is basic stuff. This is something that a lot of our own graduate students at U of L would have had as their initial slide. So this kind of thing, and I understand these researcher guys are probably getting a ton of just like one-off questions from commission meetings via emails, and they're probably doing their best to try to cover all these different queries. And they probably feel like they're getting pulled in different directions, but that's not our fault that they don't have sufficient time to devote to a project that they're getting paid a 5-figure sum on. That's sort of where
they should have turned down the contract if they couldn't devote the time. They should have said, we are not able to do this justice to this.
Exactly. And as Michael pointed out, there are people that literally do this kind of analysis professionally, and just do this, just sort of look at like the revenues and the expenditures of cities. And like you could have had some like a firm that does this for in the range of $100,000 just totally do this. So yeah, that's sort of where I am on it. Anything else in the data? Because I wanted to touch back on one of Jecorey's points he made earlier, but I don't want to lose anything while we're here on the data stuff.
I mean, maybe just to reiterate 2 things. One is, the pushing for the transparency of the data behind these charts to be published, I think is really important. That I got an official email back from the commission, and they basically said their opinion is that raw data is the PDFs. And so I don't know if you've seen that reply, Jecorey, but that's the official position, that the PDFs are the raw data and it's provided to the public. So I would love to see that, I guess, defined somewhere what they think that is, and then of course publish the real data. And then on the analysis data side, Pat was talking about expenditures, cost of services. Besides that one slide on capital expenditures, which, as you know, is just a small piece of all the expenditures of a city, there's really not much discussion of expenditures per anything. I'd love to see it at least per, ideally census areas. Show me the expenditures per census areas, maybe by zip code if you want to do zip code. But there's nothing about that, and that would just show you. It would just provide a lot of context and information about how much it really costs to run a city. And I think when you go to the public meetings and you listen to them, everyone is upset with that, or they're not getting enough services, right? Like, even though one area might think the other area is getting more, really no one's getting everything they should. And so you could show with that that information that maybe we are not providing the right amount of services for the whole city or in certain areas as well. So I'd love to see that sort of revenue versus expenditures analysis done somehow.
What's kind of interesting about that is once I questioned that 2/3 of the capital expenditures being in those 2 zip codes, they went back and did an analysis, and in this last meeting showed a different geographic representation of the capital expenditures, and showed that less than half of the capital expenditures are spent in the urban services district, but then concluded that they wouldn't be able to finish doing an analysis, which is kind of interesting considering what I'm really noticing is that we haven't had that discussion about how much capital is done and taken care of in these suburban cities, or even just outside of the urban services district. But now when we start to question that, we get back from the researchers, well, we don't have time to figure that out. I think it's because what it would show is that we're spending a hell of a lot more money out there dealing with your paving and dealing with your infrastructure than we are in those 2 zip codes that you claim we were spending 2/3 of our money on.
Totally. This is the maddening part about this is that, I mean, as we progress in a society that has this more access to data and it's more data literate, there's more data and more information. And then I'm not even sure like what some people conceptualize though as the data even is they're understanding what you're talking about. Like you're saying, people are calling the data this thing that apparently came from a Republican, like his own Excel file. Who knows what they've done with it? This isn't like a raw data source that is actually the data. This is information that someone twisted to show that 2 zip codes had all of the capital expenditures. But what you're saying is that like, so it sounds like these researchers were trying to do better, and they were trying to have a more nuanced analysis that takes us into consideration, but for some reason there's not time now. That's great to hear that. Thanks for bringing that up. This is an important part of the record on this that needs to be there. Just going back on all this data stuff, that conversation again last Friday at the commission meeting, it's just as we have more supposed understanding of data, our conversations don't seem to be any richer. Like that conversation was like an hour of like people just trying to agree on like basic definitions or what things mean. And maybe this just means that commission members need to come having done their homework. But I don't know that that's even matters in our highly polarized political society anymore, because people want to take their own interpretations of what things mean, which may not, have any bearing on reality. And how do we have a conversation about all of these very difficult, different tax rates and expenditures if we can't even agree on where EMS services are provided to, because somebody has mislabeled a chart? Like, it's a hard discussion. Jecorey, but before we headed out and finish this up, I did want to talk a little bit about the successes versus insufficiencies thing, which is super interesting. And Sarah, you made a point earlier, that like it seems like everybody is unhappy with merger, whether they're on the left or on the right or in the middle or wherever. That I don't have any data to support that. That just seems like that's a feeling in the community that a lot of people dislike merger or whatever. Clearly, this commission has been there, as you've pointed out, Jecorey, to talk about the insufficiencies. But in terms of the benefits, I know Michael and I'm not sure if Sarah, yourself, Jecorey, saw Jerry Abramson's merger presentation at the Filson Historical Society, where former Mayor for Life, Jerry Abramson, talked about his spiel. Jerry himself being one of the chief architects and proponents of merger 20 years ago. Well, they had this talk, 20-year anniversary of merger, and there's a great slide. I'm going to throw it up here. I took a screenshot, which was clearer. This is a little fuzzy, but this shows what Jerry had on his slide of what are the successes of merger are. So he's got these sort of 3 buckets here. Sample of savings. So I guess sample means that there's so many savings and we don't know what they all are. But here are some of the savings. So 10,000 a year on consolidated internet service. I mean, I guess that's a pretty small drop in the $1 billion budget of a $1 billion budget bucket. $100,000 on lower octane gas. I don't know. These seem pretty low level. $2 million on property inventory, city county property inventory. I guess these were one-time savings. I don't know. The savings here aren't adding up to a huge amount of $1 billion budget. Let's roll over here to sample of improved services. So 100 more officers in the community. That seems significant. But I mean, I was looking at the budget, pre and post merger, and it looks like post merger, we got about $100 million more dollars in the budget after merger, adjusting for inflation than we did before. So I'm not sure what the savings are there. If having a city county government means that we basically need to double the police budget. Business development, underserved areas, interesting. Mosquito control was a big one. Jerry talked about that one a lot. We better mosquito control thanks to merger. But then some other organizational things, the performance management improvement systems, overhaul of financial management. Who knows what the bottom lines are on this? But I just wanted to throw it out for, our group here is, are there other benefits, big benefits of merger? I know there was this idea in the past from urban planning realms that regional governance, like that was the future. We can be more sustainable. We can do these amazing things together as regions if we have a central regional government, which is kind of merger's kind of an experiment in that, right? But I mean, it doesn't seem real anymore, given the fact that we have just such complete different value systems depending on where you live in this community. But anyway, just to get on Jecorey's point about this, we're not seeing this commission talk about the successes. I mean, are there any other successes?
That I've kind of questioned is we have GLI represented on the commission. And to a certain extent, I feel like some of those successes should be something that they are responsible for bringing to the table. But I'd also go back to what I said earlier about the executive branch being involved. The Office for Management and Budget that is in charge of our city's money, they should also be talking about the successes. We got $388 million from the federal government from the American Rescue Plan Act. We would not have gotten that much money if we had a separate city and county. And you can look at that just comparatively of cities and counties that got less funding. We also had our suburban cities get smaller, significantly smaller amounts of funding. We can point to the last commission where Rebecca Fleischaker came to present about what has happened downtown. You can point to some of those as successes. So there are a lot of examples that I've just noticed living here throughout the years, but the commission isn't really talking about that. And I also think to a certain extent, the public meetings, which I did not participate in because I got small kids and I care way more about them than hearing people's opinions who were totally wrong about merger. No disrespect.
No,
I mean, there was a lady who said something about how there were council districts that weren't totally in the urban services district. And I was like, maybe I should have been there just so I could have raised my hand and said, actually, I represent one. But anyway, by the way, I'm going to recommend that we correct the record if we include any of those comments that were inaccurate, because what's the point of putting something in there that's inaccurate unless we actually have some correction to it. But anyway, I think to a certain extent, even those meetings highlighted the imbalance of we're just talking about the insufficiencies. I think there might have been one person who came up to the Valley Station meeting and showed some love for Councilwoman Cindy Fowler. But otherwise, these meetings have really just been venting sessions. That's why I am happy that the ones in the West End were empty, because what would have happened is you would have had a lot of folks in the West End who feel like merger is not happening for them, blaming merger for systemic issues that have been issues for decades beyond merger, and in some cases, centuries. And they would have just reinforced the narrative and the agenda that people have coming into this commission. So there are some successes. I think we just have to be intentional about following the legislation that asked us to highlight some. And just to point out the disorganization and maybe intentional disorganization of this commission, we didn't even know who or how the report was being written until last Friday when we had our meeting. We had to ask commission co-chairs, who is actually writing the report and how are we going to get recommendations into the report? And nobody knew.
Incredible. Unbelievable. I mean, that's unbelievable. Like Go ahead, Michael.
Can I ask a question? So this came up in a number of the public meetings, and I wonder if you have any insight into it. Everybody, 90% of people were like, merger was horrible. But something I heard from one of the co-chairs, Jason Nemes, multiple times, was he would say things that the phrase like demerger or unmerger is off the table. So it's not possible to even recommend that as a commission. And I wonder if you know where that is coming from, because if you read the bill, it doesn't say that's not possible. It says make your recommendation, do your report. So who on the commission has decided that any recommendation or discussion, even from the very beginning of this process, of unmerging in any way is off the table?
No one. I think that's his opinion. And way early on when we first started meeting, I expressed concerns about the city and the county coming apart. And he was very vocal and clear that he did not support that. And I don't think, just based on conversations I've had, that anyone on the commission supports that. But if that's the case, we should have been honest in those public meetings. And I've watched the playback on those public meetings, and I think overwhelmingly, people were being misled about what their options are, because you really got three. You can, well, four, if you consider that you can just continue not doing anything, but you can annex and join a suburban city if you're adjacent to them. You can create your own taxing district. You can continue to contract out services, which is going to be much more expensive. So when people come and they talk and they pop off about metro government and mergers not working for them, okay, well, here are your options. Which one would you rather have? And I don't think people are having that discussion. I mean, the Valley High School meeting in itself was just a huge political rally, with a lot of people coming in and giving stump speeches about what they should and shouldn't do. But I don't think anyone really sat back and had a conversation with them about, these are your options. Which one would work best for you? And Mayor Jer, who was, as you said, integral in making sure that merger happened, he talked about how he attempted to take unincorporated areas and get them taxing districts, and they said no. So if you're going to complain about the services that people in the urban services district get, why don't you do what they are doing, which is pay extra taxes for extra services? It doesn't really make sense. It's really insanity.
It doesn't make sense. And this is like why I'm so confused by Jason Nemes, because what do they want? I know they don't want to pay any more taxes, but they seem to want more services or better services. So I'm confused. And maybe that's just something that, like you're saying, maybe along the lines of they want a different kind of tax structure or ability to tax differently or tax less. But I mean, the thing that you hear in all of these meetings is that people are unsatisfied with their level of service. So like these two things don't square to me. And like like the comment you made about small cities, further or more contracting out for their own services, they seem to be upset that services are expensive. And I'm like, dog, like, okay, well, then come into the fold with Metro then, and it'll be cheaper,
right? But
you're not going to do any better on your own. In fact, it could be triple, what the deal is now. So go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks. And what's messed up about it is people are using taxes as a proxy. I've heard over and over when people who represent suburban cities and people who have come to the public meetings as mayors of suburban city, I'm gonna shout out Craig Greenberg again and say, please come to a meeting or send representatives, because the suburban city mayors are. So where are you at? But I'm gonna say that you've had people come into those meetings and say, my ambulance, my fire department, my this, my that, almost as if it's a private service. And we have private EMS. They are doing private services. So if you think your taxes equate to a private service, you are wrong. Your taxes, specifically with your ambulance, we found out in the last meeting, when you get your certificate of need, your jurisdiction is all of the city. You don't get to say, I'm leaving my jurisdiction to go to the inner city. No, your jurisdiction is the inner city. But when you try to say that that's your ambulance or that's your whatever department just because you pay extra taxes, why don't you just hire a private ambulance company? Why don't you just hire private security instead of having a police force? Why don't you just hire privately? Because that's essentially what we're talking about. The people who have enough money to pay for extra services, but you're mad because the public service is supposed to be for the public. They're really confusing public and private.
No, that's a great point. That is a great point. Go ahead, Sarah.
There seems to be a massive misunderstanding of the level of service in the urban service district. So I grew up in a suburban city, Douglas Hills. I say that because Bonnie Jones, she's the mayor of Douglas Hills and is also on the committee. The level of service that we receive, just basic like trash pickup, that's always a good example. The level of service in the urban service district for trash pickup, if they had that same level of service in Douglas Hills, there would be riots. Because like my trash doesn't gets missed all the time. My recycling gets missed for months. It's just a fact of what happens. But if that happened in a suburban city, that level of service, there would be riots in the street. So really understanding, you pay more because it's a smaller area, but you also do get usually a higher level of service.
I wanted to
in suburban cities. I taught at a middle school that was in an elementary school that was in Middletown. And I'll never forget, my students were about to perform. And back then the mayor of Middletown was this older white dude. He was giving a speech, the crowd was clapping and everything. And at the end of the speech, he said, "Yeah, because we are the heart of Louisville." And I'm like, Middletown is the heart of Louisville? I couldn't believe it. And I'm a West End boy, inner city slicker, and I'm like, floored at the fact that he has so much pride in his suburban city.
Yeah.
But I admire that. But it's very important that we acknowledge the needs of the entire community. And just because you have it and you all can afford to pay for some extra services doesn't mean you get to hoard those services.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we a community or are we not? Just before we wrapped it all up here, you've made some interesting statements that I just want to like follow up on or highlight or underscore. This idea that like, where are the Dems, man? Like, where are the Dems? So like, and maybe this makes sense. The mayor appointed kind of as the Metro person, Marianne Butler, who to be on the commission, which maybe that makes sense, right? Like, because she was a former D15 council person. And now she works for Middletown as a small city. I don't know, maybe like that is like an appointment that's like sort of bridging kind of multiple issues here, and I can see it there. I guess what I would have liked to have seen though in what you're talking about is this sort of, it seems like not enough involvement from the executive branch. I just would have liked to have seen like somebody that's really going to stand up and deliver on what's going on for real. And it seems like that appointment just should have been the director of budget, the budget director. Like, how is there, like, you made that, I can't believe I hadn't thought about that before. Like, that's the key person that should literally be in every single one of these meetings with all the slides, that here's exactly what we spend in these areas. And if you can't show that, then that demonstrates that office isn't doing its job correctly. If that office can't show where the dollars are going and where the receipts are, like, that is, I can't believe that role is not management and budget. That needs to be at every single one of these meetings.
And I want to be clear, I love Sister Marianne Butler. She was appointed by Greg Fisher. So she's like a carryover appointment.
Got you.
I love her. She was a council person. She got suburban city experience, but she didn't pick your trash up.
Yeah.
She didn't pave your sidewalk.
Yeah.
She's, you know what I mean? So there's some experiences that would have come from the executive branch, that should have come from the executive branch, to just simply even correct the record. Yeah. We got slides that are getting thrown up and stories that are being, made up about the slides that make no sense.
Yeah.
And we need somebody there who's doing that work to actually say, no, that's wrong.
100%. A big part of this, like a part of that earlier comment, is like, so in Jerry's presentation he made at the Filson, we asked him, what do you think about this commission, the House Bill 314? He didn't want to answer the question. We've asked, bloggers, why do they want to talk about this that are Democrats? They didn't want to talk about it. I was going to ask you why the Dems are so quiet, but you're not a Dem anymore.
Hey. I actually switched in the middle of a meeting with the mayor's administration about this commission. I changed my party right then and there on the Secretary of State's website, because I got on the call late and I hear the mayor's staffer talking about, well, we don't know how much we want to get involved. And he talked about playing it out in the media. What are you talking about? And as soon as he finished giving his word salad excuse about why they're not going to engage, this is the recommendation I said we should put in the report. I said, maybe we should add a recommendation to limit the mayoral terms to 1 term, because why is he the mayor of Louisville if he's not going to fight for Louisville?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was pissed. So I left the Democratic Party right during that call, because I do not think, as much as we attack Republicans and say they're doing X, Y, and Z, what are the Democrats doing to fight back? They might as well be in the same party. Your silence is violence. Again, political negligence. And this commission is a fine, unfortunate example of that.
Man, well, we really massively appreciate your time today. We really appreciate you, more so just in being like one of the few leaders in the community that are asking questions and standing up in the face of this. Because like as Sarah and Michael and yourself have pointed out, this could have really incredible repercussions, life or death repercussions when we're talking about EMS and police kinds of issues and public works and road safety. This is a big deal, and we really loved having you on, and your candidness and just your insight and the history, and thanks for coming in.
Y'all so much.
All right, well, we'll get this one up on the internet, y'all, and we look forward to coming back in another couple of weeks once some more things have developed, and talking again about this merger review commission and the potential impact of House Bill 314 on the great city of Louisville. All right, y'all. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Thanks, Jecorey.
Thank you.
Thank you. Later.